My name's Olivia. The day my mother-in-law deliberately poured boiling water on my arm, she laughed and called me clumsy in front of my husband and children. What she didn't expect was for my CIA credentials to fall from my pocket as I reached for a towel. The silence that filled the room that Sunday afternoon shattered every lie she'd built around me for years, and what happened next exposed a web of international deception that had been hiding in plain sight all along, right at our family dinner table. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The turkey was almost done. Golden brown and glistening under the harsh kitchen lights. I'd been basting it for 3 hours, determined to make this Sunday dinner perfect, even though my mother-in-law Eleanor made it clear years ago that nothing I did would ever be good enough for her precious son. I could hear my children, Emma and Liam, giggling in the living room as they played cards with their father, Mark. The normalcy of their laughter felt like a tiny miracle after the week I'd had, 48 hours of surveillance in a freezing car outside an embassy, followed by an emergency debrief that kept me away until Friday night. But they didn't know that. To them, I was just mom who worked too many late nights at what they thought was a boring government desk job processing visa applications. Eleanor stood by the kitchen island, arms crossed over her cashmere sweater, watching my every move like I was handling explosives instead of dinner rolls. "You're putting too much butter on those," she said, her British accent making even the simplest criticism sound refined. "Mark prefers them lighter. I've only told you this for 7 years now." I bit my tongue, smiled, and nodded. 7 years of marriage, 7 years of these dinners, 7 years of pretending I didn't notice the way she deliberately tried to make me feel inadequate. For someone who spent her workdays maintaining cover in high-pressure situations, family dinner should have been easy. It wasn't. "The gravy needs stirring," she added, not moving to help. "It's getting lumpy." I turned to the stove, wooden spoon in hand, when I felt Mark's arms wrap around my waist. "Smells amazing in here," he whispered, kissing my cheek. "You've outdone yourself." The warmth in his voice almost made me forget the tension. Almost. Eleanor cleared her throat. "Mark, darling, would you check if your father needs help bringing in more firewood? It's getting chilly." The moment he left, her smile vanished. "I saw the car," she said quietly, pouring herself a glass of wine. "The black sedan that dropped you off Friday night. Government plates." My hand froze mid-stir. "My colleague gave me a ride. My car was in the shop." "Curious colleagues you have, working such strange hours." She swirled her wine, eyes never leaving mine. "Mark tells me you were in Philadelphia. Tax conference, was it?" "Budget allocation meetings," I corrected, keeping my voice even. The lie rolled off my tongue with practiced ease. I'd been in Kiev, not Philadelphia, tracking a money laundering operation with ties to a senator's office. "Of course," she nodded, unconvinced. "And yet your shoes had fresh mud when you arrived home. Odd for someone who spent 3 days in conference rooms." The gravy bubbled, and I focused on it intently. Eleanor wasn't just an irritating mother-in-law. She noticed things. Details. It's what made her dangerous. "The turkey's done," I announced, changing the subject. "Can you call everyone to the table?" She smiled thinly. "Of course, dear." Dinner began as it always did, Robert, my father-in-law, carving the turkey while Eleanor critiqued his technique. Mark poured wine, the children fidgeted, and I passed dishes around, grateful for the momentary peace of established routine. "So," Eleanor said once everyone had food on their plates, "Mark tells me you'll be traveling again next week. Another conference?" I felt Mark's confused glance. I hadn't told him about any trip. "It's just a possibility," I said smoothly. "Nothing confirmed yet." "Mommy goes on lots of trips," Emma said, stabbing a potato with her fork. "Last time she brought me back a snow globe from Paris." I froze. I'd told the family that Trip had been to Chicago. Eleanor's eyebrow arched. "Paris? How lovely. I thought that meeting was in Chicago, Olivia?" Mark frowned. "It was Chicago, wasn't it? You brought me back that architectural book." "The snow globe was from the airport gift shop," I said quickly. "International terminal." Emma gets confused. "I'm not confused," Emma protested. "It had the Eiffel Tower in it." Eleanor's smile grew sharper. "How interesting. More gravy?" I asked, desperate to change the subject. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Please," Eleanor held out her gravy boat, and as I leaned forward with the steaming pot, she suddenly jerked her arm upward, causing the boiling liquid to splash directly onto my forearm. The pain was immediate and searing. I gasped, dropping the gravy pot with a clatter. "Oh my!" Eleanor exclaimed, her voice theatrical. How clumsy of you, Olivia. Mark jumped up. Mom, that wasn't Olivia's fault. Accidents happen, Eleanor said dismissively as I clutched my burned arm. She should have been more careful. The smirk playing at the corner of her mouth told me everything I needed to know. This was no accident. Get a towel, quickly, Mark told Liam, who ran to the kitchen. I made my way to the sink, turning on cold water to run over the angry red welt forming on my skin. My purse sat on the counter nearby, and as I reached for it with my good hand to grab the small first aid kit I always carried, my ID case tumbled out. It hit the floor with a soft thud, flipping open to reveal my CIA credentials, complete with photo, name, and security clearance level. The room fell silent. Eleanor stood frozen, wine glass halfway to her lips. Mark stared at the ID, then at me, confusion and disbelief warring on his face. Mommy? Emma's small voice broke the silence. Why does your work card say CIA? I looked at my daughter, then at my husband, then finally at Eleanor, whose expression had transformed from smug satisfaction to something I recognized all too well from my field training: calculation, assessment, recalibration of threat. Before I could speak, Eleanor laughed, a brittle sound. Well, it seems we've all been keeping secrets, haven't we? The tension in the room thickened as Robert stood up abruptly. Children, why don't you go play in the basement for a while? The adults need to talk. As Emma and Liam reluctantly left the dining room, casting confused glances back at me, I felt a shift in the air. This wasn't just about an exposed cover or a family secret anymore. Eleanor's eyes had hardened, and I recognized that look. It was the same calculating gaze I'd seen in assets who suddenly realized they'd been compromised. I reached down and picked up my ID, tucking it into my pocket. The burn on my arm seemed insignificant now compared to the situation unfolding around me. How long? Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. How long have you been lying to me? I never lied about what matters, I said carefully. About us, about loving you, about our family. Just about who you are, he shot back. Small detail. Eleanor moved to the sideboard, reaching for the decanter. Perhaps we all need something stronger than wine for this conversation. As she poured amber liquid into crystal tumblers, I noticed her hands were steady. Too steady for someone who should be shocked. You knew, I said suddenly, the realization dawning. You've suspected for a while. Eleanor's eyes met mine, and, for the first time since I'd known her, there was no pretense, no social mask. Just cold assessment. Let's just say, she replied, that I recognize a cover when I see one. I've spent enough time around people who aren't what they claim to be. Mark looked between us, confusion giving way to something darker. What the hell is going on? Mom, what are you talking about? Robert cleared his throat. Eleanor, perhaps this isn't the time. Oh, I think it's exactly the time, Robert, she cut him off. Now that our dear daughter-in-law has shown her hand, it seems only fair we show ours. She reached into her purse, extracting not the reading glasses or handkerchief I expected, but a small device about the size of a thumb drive. She placed it on the table between us. Do you know what this is, Olivia? She asked. I did. It was a high-frequency scrambler, military grade, designed to disrupt listening devices. Not something a retired history professor like Eleanor claimed to be should possess. Why don't you tell me? I countered, buying time as I assessed the situation. She pressed a button, and a soft humming filled the room. Now we can speak freely without concern for unwanted ears. Mark slammed his hand on the table. Will someone please tell me what the hell is happening? Eleanor sipped her drink calmly. Your wife works for the CIA, darling. And I suspect she's been investigating us for quite some time. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I kept my expression neutral, but my mind was racing. I hadn't been investigating the Harringtons. My assignment had nothing to do with them. Unless... That's not true, I said firmly. My work has never involved my family. Then why are you here? Eleanor pressed. Why marry into this particular family? Was Mark your target, or was it Robert's connection to the energy department? Mark turned to me, his face ashen. Olivia, please tell me this isn't true. Tell me we weren't just an assignment. The hurt in his eyes cut deeper than any physical wound. It's not true, I said, reaching for his hand, which he pulled away. I met you before I joined the agency. They recruited me 2 years after. We were married. She's lying, Eleanor said smoothly. It's what they're trained to do. Robert placed a restraining hand on his wife's arm. Eleanor, enough. But the damage was done. Mark was looking at me like I was a stranger. I think, I said carefully, that the real question is why Eleanor recognized a CIA operative so easily. And why she has counter-surveillance equipment in her purse. Robert's face darkened. This has gone far enough. No, Mark interrupted. His voice hard. I want to hear this. Mom, Dad, what is she talking about? Eleanor and Robert exchanged a look, one I'd seen countless times between field partners when an operation was compromised and contingency plans needed activation. Your parents, I said slowly, realization dawning, aren't who they claim to be either. Eleanor's laugh was cold and elegant. Oh, this is rich. The spy accusing others of deception. Stop deflecting, I said. Mark deserves the truth. All of it. The silence stretched between us, heavy with secrets. Outside, snow had begun to fall, large flakes illuminated by the porch light, creating a deceptively peaceful backdrop to the storm raging inside. Finally, Robert spoke. Eleanor was MI6. I was with British military intelligence. We've been retired for 15 years. Mark stood up so quickly his chair crashed to the floor. What? Retired is a relative term, I said, not taking my eyes off Eleanor. The Scrambler is current tech. Not something retirees keep around for nostalgia. Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. Once an operative, always an operative. Surely you understand that, Olivia. My mind was racing through years of interactions with my in-laws, recontextualizing every conversation, every pointed question, every coincidental appearance at key moments in my career. Had they been watching me all along, suspecting? Was this why Eleanor had always kept me at arm's length, not because I wasn't good enough for her son, but because she recognized something in me that mirrored herself? Did you know? I asked Mark. Any of it? He shook his head, looking shell-shocked. I thought she taught British literature at Cambridge. That dad was an energy consultant. We did those things, Robert said quietly. Not all covers are complete fabrications. And the boiling water? I asked Eleanor, holding up my burned arm. Was that your idea of a field test? Or just spite? I needed to see how you'd react under pressure, she admitted without remorse. Though I confess, I didn't expect such a dramatic revelation. Mark's laugh was hollow. So my mother deliberately injured my wife to what? Test her spy reflexes? And my wife has been lying about her entire career. This is insane. Mark, I started. Don't. He held up a hand. Just don't, Olivia. Or whatever your real name is. Olivia is my real name, I said softly. Everything about us is real. Eleanor made a dismissive sound. Spare us the sentimentality. What we need to discuss is why the CIA placed an operative in our family. What are you after? I wasn't placed anywhere, I insisted. I met Mark. At Sarah's wedding. It was completely unrelated to any assignment. Coincidences rarely exist in our line of work, Eleanor countered. Robert, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. The Kharkov file. Eleanor's head snapped toward him. Robert. The Kharkov file, he repeated, looking directly at me. Is that what this is about? The name meant nothing to me, but I didn't let it show. In this moment, information was power. Why don't you tell me what you think this is about? I suggested. Mark looked between us, frustration building. Will someone please speak plainly? What is the Kharkov file? Robert hesitated, then sighed. It was our last operation before retiring. Ukraine, 2006. There were complications. Complications, Eleanor echoed bitterly. 3 agents dead, a diplomat's daughter kidnapped, and evidence that never should have seen the light of day. My pulse quickened. 2006, Ukraine. I'd been briefed on an operation gone wrong during my training, used as a case study in how interagency cooperation could collapse with devastating consequences. But I'd never heard it called the Kharkov file. That operation was a disaster because American intelligence interfered, Eleanor continued, her accent becoming more pronounced with her anger. They compromised our assets and then denied involvement. When it all went sideways. Is that why you've hated me from the beginning? I asked. Because I'm American? I've hated you because I knew what you were, she snapped. I've been waiting for years for the other shoe to drop, for you to finally make your move. Mark had gone pale. So our entire relationship, our marriage, our children, it's all been some kind of… What? Espionage long game? No, I said firmly, reaching for his hand across the table. This time he didn't pull away. Mark, look at me. I love you. I've always loved you. My work has nothing to do with your parents or anything that happened in Ukraine. Then why are you here? Eleanor demanded. Because I married a man I love, I said, not breaking eye contact with Mark. And then I happened to join the CIA 2 years later. That's all. A remarkable coincidence, Eleanor said, unconvinced. Or fate, I countered. The universe has a strange sense of humor. The tension in the room was palpable. Outside, the Snow was falling harder now, blanketing the world in white silence. I need some air, Mark said suddenly, pulling his hand away and standing up. This is too much. Mark, I started, but Robert cut in. Let him go, Olivia. He needs time. As Mark grabbed his coat and disappeared through the front door, I felt a piece of my heart go with him. I'd always known that if my cover was blown, I might lose everything. But sitting there, facing my in-laws across a table of cooling food, I realized that everything had come to mean so much more than I'd ever anticipated. Now, Eleanor said, leaning forward once the door closed behind her son. Let's dispense with the charade. What does Langley want with the Kharkov file? I met her gaze steadily. I told you, I don't know what you're talking about. Whatever operation you were involved in 15 years ago has nothing to do with me or my assignment. Your assignment, Robert repeated. So you admit you are on an assignment? I hesitated. There was no point in complete denial now. Yes, I'm active. No, it has nothing to do with you or anything that happened in Ukraine. Then what? Eleanor pressed. What exactly do you do for the CIA that requires so many conferences and mysterious late-night phone calls? I weighed my options carefully. Revealing operational details was against protocol, but this situation had moved beyond standard procedure the moment my ID hit the floor. I track financial networks connected to foreign influence in domestic politics, I said finally. Money laundering, primarily. Nothing to do with old MI6 operations or retired agents. Robert and Eleanor exchanged another look, one I couldn't quite read. Unless, I added, a new thought forming, there's something about this Kharkov file that connects to my current case. Eleanor's slight flinch told me I'd hit closer to home than she would like. The children, Robert said suddenly. They should not be part of this. For once, I agreed with my father-in-law. They're innocent. Whatever is happening between us stays between us. Eleanor nodded, the first sign of genuine agreement since this confrontation began. On that, at least, we can concur. I looked toward the window, watching the snow pile up on the sill, wondering where Mark had gone and what he was thinking. 7 years of marriage, and tonight he had discovered that neither his wife nor his parents were who they claimed to be. How did anyone come back from that kind of revelation? He's stronger than you think, Eleanor said quietly, following my gaze. He gets that from me. Despite everything, I almost smiled. It was the first genuine, maternal thing I'd ever heard her say. I know he's strong, I replied. It's one of the reasons I fell in love with him. For a moment, we were just two women who loved the same man, one as a mother, one as a wife. Then reality reasserted itself. If what you say is true, Robert said carefully, and your assignment isn't connected to us or Kharkov, then we have a problem. What kind of problem? I asked. Eleanor sighed, suddenly looking every one of her 62 years. The kind where someone else might be watching all of us. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter storm outside. What do you mean? 3 weeks ago, Robert explained, I received a message from an old contact. Someone has been asking questions about Kharkov. Detailed questions that few people would know to ask. And you thought it was me, I realized. Or rather, you thought I was sent to extract information. Eleanor didn't confirm or deny, but her silence was answer enough. If not you, Robert continued, then who? And why now, after all these years? Before I could respond, the front door burst open, bringing with it a gust of snow and frigid air. Mark stood in the doorway, his coat white with accumulation, his face flushed from cold. There's someone watching the house, he said without preamble. Black SUV at the end of the street. They've been there since before dinner. Eleanor was on her feet instantly, moving to the window with the practiced caution of someone who knew exactly how to stay out of a sniper's sight line. How did you notice them? I asked Mark, surprised. I'm not completely oblivious, he replied, a hint of bitterness in his voice. Growing up with them, he jerked his head toward his parents, you pick up a few things. Situational awareness. Was a dinnertime game in this house? I nodded, a new respect forming. I'd always thought Mark was remarkably perceptive, but I'd attributed it to his natural intelligence, not training. 2 men, Eleanor reported from the window. Engine running. I joined her, careful to stay to the side of the curtain. The SUV was dark, American-made, with tinted windows and government plates partially obscured by snow. Not one of yours? Robert asked me. I shook my head. I wasn't followed here. And if the agency was watching, I'd have been notified. Unless they don't trust you either, Eleanor suggested. It was possible, but unlikely. No. This is something else. Mark looked between us, his initial shock giving way to a kind of resigned determination. So what do we do now? Call the police? Eleanor let out a small, derisive laugh. And tell them what? That former spies are having a family disagreement while being watched by unknown operatives? We need to get the children somewhere safe, I said, thinking of Emma and Liam playing obliviously in the basement. Then figure out what's happening. For once, Eleanor didn't argue. Robert, there's still the cabin. Off the grid, fully stocked. He nodded. I'll get the go bags. Mark stared at his father. You have go bags? For what, a spy emergency? For exactly this kind of situation, Robert replied simply. Old habits. As he disappeared upstairs, Mark turned to me, his expression unreadable. Did you know? About them? I shook my head. No. I would have told you if I had. Would you? He asked quietly. You've kept everything else from me. The hurt in his voice cut deep. Mark, not now, Eleanor interrupted. You can sort out your marital problems once we're all safe. She was right, of course. Personal feelings had to take a back seat to immediate security concerns. It was Fieldwork 101. I'll get the children ready, I said. Mark, can you gather some of their things? Quietly. Make it seem like we're just going for an overnight at the cabin because of the snow. He nodded, still distant but focused on the task. As I headed toward the basement stairs, Eleanor caught my arm, my burned arm, and I winced despite myself. If you're playing a deeper game, she said, her voice low enough that only I could hear, if my son or grandchildren get hurt because of it, what happened to your arm will seem like a warm bath compared to what I'll do to you. I met her gaze. Without flinching. I would die before I let anything happen to them. That's not CIA training talking. That's just being a mother. Something shifted in her eyes, not warmth, exactly, but perhaps a glimmer of recognition. She released my arm. With a nod. As I descended the stairs to where my children played, unaware that their world was about to change dramatically, I tried to steady my racing thoughts. Who was watching us? What did they want? And most importantly, how was I going to protect my family from a threat I didn't understand, while navigating the wreckage of lies and half-truths that had suddenly exploded around us? The snow continued to fall outside, covering tracks, muffling sounds, and creating a deceptive blanket of peace over a night that had become anything but peaceful. My CIA training had prepared me for many scenarios, but nothing had prepared me for this, the collision of my professional life with the family I loved more than anything. Emma looked up as I reached the bottom of the stairs, her smile bright and trusting. Mommy, are we having dessert soon? I forced a smile, pushing down the fear and uncertainty. Change of plans, sweetheart. We're going on an adventure. The drive to Robert and Eleanor's secluded cabin took nearly 2 hours through winding mountain roads made treacherous by the steadily falling snow. No one spoke much. The children dozed in the back seat, lulled by the rhythmic sweep of windshield wipers and the warm air blasting from the vents. Mark drove with tight-lipped concentration, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. In the rearview mirror, I caught Eleanor watching me, her eyes reflecting the occasional passing headlights, calculating and wary. Robert had insisted. We take separate vehicles, standard protocol for evasion, he'd explained. He'd gone ahead to secure the perimeter, another phrase that sounded strange coming from my supposedly retired academic father-in-law. Turn here, Eleanor directed as we approached an unmarked dirt road nearly invisible beneath the snow. Cut the headlights once we're a quarter-mile in. Mark complied without question, a lifetime of following his mother's instructions apparently overriding even his current state of shock and betrayal. The cabin materialized out of the darkness like a shadow taking form, a substantial 2-story structure of weathered logs and stone, not the rustic getaway I'd been expecting. No lights shone from within, but smoke curled from the chimney, signaling Robert's presence. Stay in the car, I told Mark as we pulled to a stop. I want to check the surroundings first. No, Eleanor countered, already opening her door. You stay with the children. Mark comes with me. I bristled at the command but recognized the logic. The children knew Eleanor, would feel safer with her familiar presence than with me if they woke to find themselves in a strange place. And, right now, trust was in short supply all around. As they disappeared around the side of the cabin, I twisted in my seat to study my sleeping children. Emma's head rested against her brother's shoulder, her breathing deep and even. Liam's face was peaceful in sleep, free from the confusion and fear that would inevitably come when he awoke to this new reality where his mother was not who he thought she was. How would I explain it to them? The secrecy, the dual life I'd been leading? Would they understand that everything I'd done to keep them safe, to make the world they would inherit a little less dangerous? The front door of the cabin swung open, spilling golden light into the darkness. Robert stood silhouetted in the doorway, rifle in hand. The sight was jarring, my scholarly father-in-law transformed into a vigilant sentry. All clear, he called softly. Bring them in. I gathered Liam in my arms while Mark returned for Emma. As we carried our sleeping children into the cabin, I couldn't help but scan the tree line, searching for signs we'd been followed. The forest revealed nothing but silence and snow. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly well appointed, comfortable furniture, a fully equipped kitchen, and a stone fireplace where flames crackled cheerfully, belying the tension filling the room. This was no weekend retreat hastily prepared for family getaways. This was a safe house, carefully maintained and ready for exactly this kind of emergency. Guest rooms are upstairs, Robert said, locking and bolting the door behind us. Children can take the one on the left. We settled Emma and Liam into twin beds, removing only their shoes and jackets. They barely stirred, exhausted from the day's events and the late hour. I placed a gentle kiss on each forehead, lingering a moment longer than necessary, drawing strength from their innocent presence. When I returned downstairs, I found the others gathered around a solid oak table where Robert had spread out a topographic map of the surrounding area. An encrypted satellite phone sat beside it, along with what appeared to be a small arsenal, 2 handguns, a hunting rifle, and various other equipment I recognized from my own field training. "Do you really think all that's necessary?" Mark asked, eyeing the weapons. "Better to have and not need," Eleanor replied, checking the magazine of a compact 9mm with practiced ease. I approached the table cautiously. "We need to talk about what's happening. Those men watching the house, who are they?" Robert's expression was grim. "Unknown. But they're professional. Government-issue vehicle, standard surveillance pattern. Could they be CIA?" Eleanor asked pointedly, looking at me. "Perhaps. Your colleagues keeping tabs?" I shook my head. "If they were, I'd know about it. My handler would have briefed me." "Unless you're the one being watched," Robert suggested. The thought had already crossed my mind. "Possible, but unlikely. My current assignment isn't sensitive enough to warrant that kind of resource allocation." "And what exactly is your current assignment?" Mark asked, the first direct question he'd addressed to me since leaving the house. I hesitated, weighing professional obligation against the need for transparency. Under the circumstances, protocol seemed less important than trust. "I've been tracking financial connections between a Russian oligarch named Petrov and several high-ranking officials in the Defense Department," I explained. "Money laundering through art purchases, primarily." "Alexei Petrov?" Eleanor's head snapped up, her expression sharp. "You know him?" I asked, surprised. She exchanged a look with Robert before answering. "He was a minor player in Moscow when we were active. Energy sector investments, political connections. Nothing that would have put him on our radar except..." "Except what?" Mark pressed when she trailed off. "Except he had ties to Kharkov," Robert finished. "Peripheral, but there." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter night outside. What exactly happened in Kharkov? The full story, not the redacted version they use in training scenarios. Eleanor sank into a chair, suddenly looking older than her years. "It was supposed to be a simple extraction. A scientist who'd been developing specialized drone technology wanted to defect. We were sent to bring him and his research to the West. The Americans wanted him too," Robert continued. "But he specifically requested British handlers. Said he didn't trust the CIA after what happened to his colleague the year before." "What went wrong?" I asked. "Everything," Eleanor said bitterly. "Our safe house was compromised. Someone had leaked our exfiltration route. The scientist was killed, along with 2 of our team. And a diplomat's daughter who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time became collateral damage. MI6 blamed the CIA for the leak," Robert added. "The CIA denied involvement. Both sides classified everything related to the operation, and those of us who survived were quietly reassigned or encouraged to retire." "And the research?" I asked. "What happened to it?" "Officially, it was destroyed in the firefight," Eleanor said. "Unofficially." She shrugged, leaving the sentence unfinished. Mark had been listening intently, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "So you think whoever was watching us tonight is connected to something that happened 17 years ago? Why now?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Robert mused. "Why now, after all this time?" A thought struck me. "The scientist's name. What was it?" "Dmitry Volkov," Eleanor answered. "Brilliant mind. Specialized in autonomous guidance systems." The name rang a bell, faint but persistent. I'd seen it recently in a briefing document related to the Petrov investigation, but I couldn't remember the context. "And the diplomat whose daughter was killed?" I pressed. "Charles Harrington," Robert said. "No relation to us, despite the shared surname. He was stationed at the British Embassy in Kiev at the time." I absorbed this information, trying to connect it to my current case. In my investigation of Petrov, I've uncovered financial transactions to a shell company called Kharkov Innovations. I assumed it was named after the city, but now I'm wondering if it's more specific than that. Eleanor's expression sharpened. When did these transactions begin? Recently. Within the last 6 months. Large sums moving through a series of offshore accounts before landing in Kharkov Innovations. And you had no idea this might connect to us? Her tone was skeptical. None, I insisted. The name meant nothing to me beyond its geographical reference. My focus was on tracking the money, not the historical context. Mark, who had been pacing near the fireplace, suddenly stopped. So let me understand this. Mom and Dad were involved in a botched operation years ago that got people killed. Now someone's moving money through a company named after that operation, and unknown men are watching our house. And my wife, who turns out to be a CIA agent, is investigating the money without knowing the connection. He ran a hand through his hair. Does that about sum it up? Put that way, it sounded either like an extraordinary coincidence or a carefully orchestrated manipulation. Neither option was comforting. There's more, Robert said quietly. He moved to a bookshelf and removed a false panel, revealing a small safe. After entering a combination, he extracted a weathered leather portfolio. What is that? I asked. Insurance, he replied, placing it on the table. After Kharkov, I made copies of certain documents. Not the classified operational details. I wasn't that foolish, but enough to establish a timeline of who knew what and when. Eleanor looked surprised. You never told me about this. Because you would have objected, he said simply. And rightly so. It was a breach of protocol. But after what happened to Jennings and Whitcomb, I wasn't taking chances. He opened the portfolio to reveal a stack of papers, copies of communications, handwritten notes, and what appeared to be excerpts from official reports with most information redacted. If someone is reviving interest in Kharkov, Robert continued, these might help us understand why. As we began sifting through the documents, a pattern slowly emerged. The operation had been compromised not by a single catastrophic leak, as the official narrative suggested, but through a series of small security breaches that, taken together, had exposed the entire mission. Look at this, I said, pointing to a communication dated 3 days before the extraction attempt. This message changed the rendezvous point from the original location to the warehouse district. Eleanor nodded grimly. Where the ambush happened. But it came through official channels, Robert noted. Authenticated with the correct protocols. An inside job, I murmured. Someone with high-level access. Mark, who had been reading over my shoulder, straightened. The signature on that order. R. Chandler. Why does that name sound familiar? Eleanor and Robert exchanged another of their loaded glances. Richard Chandler, Eleanor said carefully. He was deputy director of operations for MI6 at the time. He retired the year after Kharkov with full honors and a knighthood. And now? I asked. Now he sits on the board of several defense contractors, Robert replied. Including one that recently received a major contract for drone technology, I finished, the pieces clicking into place. Let me guess, autonomous guidance systems? Robert nodded. The very technology Volkov was developing. I sat back. Mind racing. If Chandler deliberately sabotaged the extraction to get his hands on Volkov's research, and has been sitting on it all these years waiting for the right moment to monetize it, he'd be very motivated to ensure no one connected those dots, Eleanor concluded. Mark looked between us, horrified understanding dawning. You think this Chandler person sent those men to watch us? That he's behind whatever's happening? It's a theory, I said cautiously. But it would explain why someone's suddenly interested in Kharkov after all this time. If the technology is finally being deployed commercially, there'd be a paper trail, Robert agreed. One that might lead back to its origins. And to Chandler, Eleanor added. A heavy silence fell over the room as we considered the implications. If our theory was correct, we weren't dealing with a simple matter of old espionage coming to light. We were potentially threatening a powerful man's reputation, freedom, and considerable fortune. We need more information, I said finally. I need to contact my handler, see if there's any chatter about Chandler or unusual surveillance orders. Eleanor shook her head. Too risky. If Chandler still has connections inside the intelligence community, and he almost certainly does, your inquiry could alert him. She was right, of course. Standard channels might be compromised. I needed another approach. What about your old contacts? I asked. Anyone still active who might be willing to make discreet inquiries? Possibly, Robert conceded. Though most of our contemporaries are retired or dead. There's Matthews, Eleanor suggested. He always had a soft spot for you. Robert considered this, then nodded. I can reach out. But it will take time. Time we may not have, I pointed out. Those men watching the house know we've fled. They'll be looking for us. This place is secure, Robert assured me. Off the grid, no digital footprint. We registered it under a shell corporation decades ago. But we can't stay here indefinitely, Mark interjected. The kids have school. We have jobs. Lives. The practicality of his concern was so normal, so disconnected from the world of espionage and danger we were discussing, that it struck me with unexpected force. This was the reality of my dual existence, the mundane and the clandestine constantly at odds, with my family caught in between. We need a plan, I said, refocusing. Not just to understand what's happening, but to resolve it safely. Eleanor leaned forward, her tactical mind clearly engaged. If Chandler is behind this, we need leverage. Something concrete that ties him to Kharkov and the theft of Volkov's research. These documents are suggestive, Robert said, gesturing to the portfolio, but not definitive. We need more. I thought about the financial trail I'd been following. If Petrov is connected to all this, his transactions might provide the link. We need. The money flowing into Kharkov Innovations has to go somewhere. Can you access your case files remotely? Eleanor asked. I hesitated. Doing so would violate about a dozen security protocols. But under the circumstances. Yes, I admitted. I have an encrypted laptop in my go bag. I can access the secure server through a VPN. Do it, she said decisively. If there's a connection between Petrov's money and Chandler, we need to find it. As I retrieved my laptop and began setting up, Mark approached, his expression troubled. Can I talk to you? He asked quietly. Alone? I nodded, following him to the kitchen where we could speak privately. This is really happening, isn't it? He said once we were alone. This isn't some elaborate misunderstanding or paranoid overreaction. It's real, I confirmed gently. I'm sorry, Mark. I never wanted any of this to touch you or the kids. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed defensively. All these years, I thought I knew you. I thought we had an honest relationship, despite the occasional unexplained trip or late-night call. We do have an honest relationship, I insisted. Everything between us, our feelings, our family, our life together, that's all real. The only thing I kept from you was my work. A pretty significant thing, he pointed out. I couldn't argue with that. Yes, it is. And I hated lying to you about it. But it was the only way I could do the job and keep you all safe. Safe, he repeated, a bitter edge to his laugh. And now we're hiding in a cabin in the woods because dangerous men are after us. Real safe, Olivia. The accusation stung. Not least because it contained a grain of truth. This situation isn't because of my work, I reminded him. It's connected to your parents' past. My parents, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. Another lie I've been living with my entire life. I reached for his hand, relieved when he didn't pull away. I'm so sorry, Mark. For all of it. But right now, we need to focus on keeping the children safe and figuring out what's happening. He looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time since my CIA credentials had tumbled onto the kitchen floor hours earlier. Who are you, really? He asked softly. When you're not being my wife or the kid's mother or a government employee with a boring desk job, who is Olivia Harrington? It was a profound question, one that cut to the heart of my compartmentalized existence. Who was I, stripped of all the roles and covers I'd assumed? I'm someone who believes in protecting people who can't protect themselves, I said finally. Someone who's good at finding patterns and following money trails to uncover wrongdoing. Someone who loves her family fiercely and would do anything to keep them safe. I squeezed his hand. That's who I've always been, Mark. The CIA just gave me a different context for those traits. He was silent for a long moment, processing. Then, when did they recruit you? Really? 2 years after we were married, I confirmed. I was working as a financial analyst at Merrill Lynch. They approached me because of my skill with complex money trails and pattern recognition. And you said yes. Not right away, I admitted. I turned them down twice. But then there was that terror attack in Boston, and I realized I wanted to do more than just track corporate assets. I wanted to make a difference. Understanding flickered in his eyes. It was the same impulse that had led him to abandon a lucrative corporate law practice for public defense work, the desire to use his skills for something meaningful. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, the hurt evident in his voice. I wasn't allowed to, I said simply. The rules are absolute. No disclosure to family or friends, regardless of the relationship. And later, when I was deeper in, the stakes seemed too high. The things I was working on, if certain people knew you had knowledge of them, it would have put you in danger. And now we're in danger anyway, he observed wryly. I couldn't argue with that either. Yes. But we'll figure this out, Mark. We will. A noise from the doorway interrupted us. Eleanor stood there, her expression uncharacteristically hesitant. Sorry to intrude, she said. But Robert's made contact with Matthews. He's agreed to help, but he needs information only Olivia can provide. I nodded, giving Mark's hand a final squeeze before following Eleanor back to the main room. Whatever personal reckoning awaited us would have to wait. Right now, we had a more immediate crisis to resolve. Robert was speaking quietly into the satellite phone, his expression grave. He looked up as we entered. Matthews wants the file numbers for your Petrov investigation, he said, covering the mouthpiece. He thinks he can cross-reference them with some archival material he still has access to. I hesitated only briefly before reciting the classification codes from memory. Robert relayed them into the phone, then listened intently to the response. He'll call back in an hour, he reported after ending the call. In the meantime, he suggests we prepare for visitors. He thinks our location may have been compromised. Eleanor was instantly alert. How? The satellite phone, Robert admitted grimly. He says there's been chatter about a new tracking system specifically designed for encrypted communications. If Chandler has access to it, we need to move, Eleanor said decisively. Now, before they can mobilize. Move where? Mark asked. If they can track the satellite phone, what's to stop them from following us wherever we go? It was a good question, and one I didn't have an immediate answer for. Standard evasion tactics assumed certain limitations in tracking technology. If those limitations no longer applied, we split up, I said suddenly, the outline of a plan forming. Robert takes the satellite phone and heads north, creating a diversion. The rest of us go south, toward the city. We'll be harder to track in an urban environment. Eleanor considered this, then nodded approvingly. It could work. But the children will slow us down. We're not leaving them, Mark said firmly. Of course not, she agreed. But we need to consider their safety above all else. Perhaps they should go with Robert. The cabin at Lake Winnipesaukee is still maintained. They'd be secure there with him. The thought of separating from my children made my stomach clench, but tactically, it made sense. Robert could protect them, and without them, Eleanor, Mark. And I would be more mobile, better able to confront whatever was coming. Before I could respond, a soft sound from the staircase caught our attention. Emma stood there in her pajamas, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Mommy, she called, her voice small. Why is everyone fighting? Are the bad men coming here too? And just like that, the abstract danger we'd been discussing became viscerally real. This wasn't just about old espionage secrets or modern financial crimes. It was about my daughter, standing frightened on a staircase in the middle of the night, suddenly aware that her world had shifted in ways she couldn't possibly understand. I moved to her quickly, gathering her into my arms. No, sweetie. No bad men are coming here. We're just having a grown-up talk about some complicated things. She looked at me with those clear, trusting eyes that saw so much more than I sometimes gave her credit for. Is it because of your special work card? The one that fell on the floor? I glanced at the others, then back at my daughter. In that moment, I made a decision. No more lies, not to the people I loved most in the world. Yes, I said gently. It's partly because of that. My job is more complicated than I've told you. Sometimes I help the government with special problems. Like a spy, she asked, her eyes widening. I smiled despite the tension in the room. Something like that. But it's still me, Emma. I'm still your mom. That's the most important job I have, and nothing will ever change that. She considered this with the serious contemplation only a 7-year-old can muster. Does Dad know? He does now, I confirmed. And Grandma and Grandpa have special jobs too. She looked over at Eleanor with new interest. Is Grandma a spy too? For the first time that evening, Eleanor's smile seemed genuine. I was, darling. A long time ago. Emma's face lit up. That's so cool. Can you teach me spy stuff? The innocence of her reaction, the uncomplicated acceptance of this new reality, broke the tension in the room. Mark let out a surprised laugh, and even Robert's stern expression softened. Perhaps when you're older, Eleanor said, coming to take Emma's other hand. For now, though, we all need to get some rest. Tomorrow will be a busy day. As Eleanor led Emma back upstairs, promising to check on Liam and tuck them both in, I exchanged a look with Mark. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with dangers both known and unknown. But seeing the determination in his eyes, I felt a surge of hope. Whatever came next, we would face it together, not just as husband and wife, but as partners aware of each other's true strengths and capabilities for the first time. And somehow, That made all the difference. Dawn broke with a pale, watery light filtering through the pine trees surrounding the cabin. I hadn't slept. None of the adults had, though the children remained peacefully unaware upstairs, having eventually drifted back to sleep after Emma's midnight discovery. We'd spent the remaining hours of darkness formulating a plan, one that evolved as Matthews called back with troubling information. Petrov isn't just connected to Chandler, Robert reported after ending the call. He's financing the commercial development of Volkov's drone technology through a series of shell companies. Matthews confirmed that the original research was smuggled out after the Kharkov operation went south. By Chandler? I asked. Robert nodded grimly. Matthews found internal communications suggesting Chandler orchestrated the ambush to eliminate Volkov and acquire his research exclusively for British interests. And the collateral damage? Eleanor's voice was tight. The diplomat's daughter? Our agents? Acceptable losses, apparently, Robert said bitterly. Matthews says Chandler specifically arranged for the diplomat to be in the area that day. Charles Harrington had begun asking questions about unofficial operations in his jurisdiction. Mark, who had been listening intently, frowned. So this Chandler deliberately got this diplomat's daughter killed because her father was becoming inconvenient? It appears so, Robert confirmed. And he's been protecting that secret for 17 years. The implications were staggering. Not just corruption or theft of intellectual property, but premeditated murder disguised as operational casualties. No wonder Chandler would go to extreme lengths to keep it buried. There's more, Robert continued. The tracking system I mentioned? It's based on Volkov's research. That's why they can find the satellite phone despite its encryption. The technology was always about more than just drones. It was about surveillance, I realized. Undetectable, inescapable surveillance. Eleanor's expression darkened. If that technology goes into widespread deployment. She didn't need to finish the thought. The implications for privacy, for freedom, for the entire concept of security were profound. This wasn't just about old espionage grudges or covering up past crimes, it was about the future of surveillance itself. We need to move quickly, I said, checking my watch. If Matthews is right about the tracking capabilities, we have maybe 2 hours before they pinpoint this location. We'd decided against splitting up. After Emma's discovery, separating the family seemed not just tactically flawed but emotionally untenable. Instead, we would move together to a location none of us had previous connections to, a small hunting lodge owned by one of Mark's law school friends, who was currently overseas. Grab only essentials, Eleanor instructed as we began preparations. 1 bag each. Nothing traceable. I went upstairs to wake the children, finding them curled together in the same bed despite having started the night in separate ones. Emma's small arm was thrown protectively over her younger brother, their breathing synchronized in sleep. For a moment, I simply watched them, these perfect beings who had no idea their world had irrevocably changed overnight. Time to wake up, sweethearts, I said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. We're going on another adventure today. Emma stirred first, her eyes fluttering open. Is it still a secret spy mission? She whispered, excitement rather than fear coloring her voice. I smiled despite myself. Something like that. Can you help get your brother ready? We need to leave soon. She nodded solemnly, immediately assuming the responsibility with the seriousness only a 7-year-old can muster. As she gently shook Liam awake, explaining in hushed tones that they were going on a special trip, I gathered their clothes and packed a small bag with their essentials. Downstairs, the preparations continued with military precision. Robert and Eleanor moved with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this many times before, checking weapons, securing documents, eliminating traces of our presence. Mark, after an initial awkwardness, found his role gathering supplies and preparing the vehicles. We take both cars, Eleanor was saying as I came downstairs with the children. Robert and I in one, you 3 in the other. Different routes to the same destination. Less predictable that way. I nodded my agreement. It was standard protocol for high-risk movements, divide the targets, multiply the challenges for any pursuers. If we're separated, Robert added, handing me a small, unmarked phone, use this to contact us. It's clean, untraceable. One time. Use only. As we finalized the last details, I pulled Mark aside. Are you okay with this? I asked quietly. It's not too late to find another way. Maybe we could contact official channels, get protective custody. He shook his head. And trust the same agencies that might be compromised by Chandler? No. I may be new to this world, Olivia, but I'm not naive. We do this ourselves. There was a new confidence in his stance, a determination that both surprised and heartened me. The shock and betrayal hadn't disappeared, but they'd been channeled into something productive, focused. Besides, he added with a grim smile, it seems espionage runs in the family. Maybe I've got more of my parents in me than I thought. Before I could respond, Eleanor approached, her expression serious. It's time. We've stayed in one place too long already. With a final check of our supplies and weapons, I was carrying my service pistol, while Mark had reluctantly accepted a handgun from Robert. We prepared to leave. The children, sensing the gravity of the situation despite our attempts to frame it as an adventure, were unusually quiet as we helped them into their coats. Remember, Robert said as we stood by the vehicles, if anything goes wrong, the rendezvous point is the boathouse at Lakeside. No waiting more than 2 hours. If the others don't arrive, proceed to the secondary location. We nodded our understanding. These were protocols I knew well from my training, but hearing them applied to my family, to my children, made them feel surreal, as if two separate worlds had collided in ways I was still struggling to process. As we prepared to part ways, Eleanor surprised me by pulling me into a brief, fierce hug. Keep them safe, she whispered, and I knew she meant not just the children but Mark as well. I will, I promised. With my life if necessary. She nodded, a flash of approval in her eyes. I believe you would. Perhaps I misjudged you all these years. It wasn't quite an apology for 7 years of cold judgment and thinly veiled hostility, but under the circumstances, it felt like a monumental shift. As we pulled away from the cabin, I checked the rearview mirror to see Robert and Eleanor heading in the opposite direction. The snow had stopped overnight, but the roads remained treacherous, forcing us to drive slower than I would have preferred. Where exactly are we going? Mark asked, consulting the map Robert had marked with our route. A hunting lodge near the Vermont border, I replied, carefully navigating a particularly icy curve. Your friend David's place. I haven't been there in years, he mused. Not since law school. That's why it's perfect. No recent connection to either of us, nothing that would appear in any database search of our properties or known locations. In the back seat, the children had fallen into a subdued game of I Spy, punctuated by occasional questions about when we would stop for breakfast or whether the lodge would have a TV. Their ability to adapt, to find normalcy even in the most abnormal situations, amazed me. We drove for nearly 3 hours, taking a deliberately circuitous route to avoid main highways and surveillance cameras. I changed license plates at our first stop, swapping them with an abandoned car in a long-term airport parking lot, a trick I'd learned during training but never expected to use in real life. The hunting lodge appeared around midday, a sturdy structure of logs and stone nestled against a backdrop of snow-covered pines. It looked peaceful, isolated, exactly what we needed. Wait in the car, I instructed as we pulled up. I want to check the perimeter first. Mark nodded, positioning himself protectively between the children in the back seat, his borrowed gun held low but ready. The sight of my husband, my gentle, justice-oriented public defender husband, prepared to defend our children with lethal force if necessary was yet another surreal moment in a day full of them. I circled the lodge carefully, checking for signs of disturbance or surveillance. Finding none, I used the key Mark had obtained from a hidden compartment in his office, retrieved during a carefully planned stop, to enter the building. The interior was rustic but comfortable, a large main room with a stone fireplace, a small but functional kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a loft space accessible by a ladder. Most importantly, it appeared undisturbed, with a fine layer of dust indicating no recent visitors. After a thorough search, I returned to the car and signaled the all clear. As the children scrambled out, stretching their legs and immediately exploring their new surroundings with excited chatter, Mark unloaded our meager supplies. Do you think your parents made it to their location? He asked quietly. I hope so, I replied, checking the unmarked phone. No messages yet, which could be good or bad. They're good at this, Mark. It's been years, but some skills never fade. He nodded, then hesitated. Can I ask you something? Something I've been wondering since last night? Of course. Did you ever suspect? About them, I mean. With your training, did you ever notice anything that should have tipped you off? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself. There were moments, I admitted. Small things. The way your father always positions himself facing doors in restaurants. How your mother can describe a stranger perfectly after seeing them for only seconds. But I dismissed it as paranoia or excellent observation skills. Not unlike the traits I've always admired in you, he observed with a hint of irony. I smiled. Ruefully. I suppose we're all drawn to the familiar, even when we don't recognize it for what it is. As we settled into the lodge, establishing security measures and creating some semblance of normality for the children, I found myself reflecting on the strange parallels between my in-laws and myself. Had Eleanor seen herself in me all those years ago? Had that been the source of her hostility, not that I wasn't good enough for her son, but that I was too much like her, representing a life she thought she'd left behind? The unmarked phone buzzed around mid-afternoon. A text message, encrypted, arrived safely. No signs of pursuit. Contact established with M. Will update at 1800. Relief washed over me as I showed the message to Mark. At least his parents were safe for now. What happens next? He asked as we watched the children building a snowman outside the front window, their innocent play a stark contrast to the danger surrounding us. We wait for more information from Matthews, I replied. And I need to access my case files on Petrov. If we can establish a concrete link between him and Chandler, particularly regarding the commercialization of Volkov's technology, we might have enough leverage to neutralize the threat. Neutralize, Mark repeated, testing the word. You mean, expose them? I hesitated. In an ideal world, yes. Expose the corruption, bring Chandler to justice for his crimes, stop the technology from being deployed. But realistically, people with that kind of power rarely face consequences, he finished, the lawyer in him well acquainted with how justice often faltered when confronted with wealth and influence. We might have to settle for leverage, I acknowledged. Enough evidence to ensure they leave us alone, even if they never face public accountability. Mark frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the compromise. That's not justice. No, I agreed. It's survival. Sometimes in this work, that's the best outcome you can hope for. The idealist in him rebelled against this pragmatism, I could see it in his expression. It was one of the things I'd always loved about him, his unwavering belief that right should triumph, that systems could work if good people insisted on it. There has to be another way, he said finally. A way to ensure both our safety and real justice. I wanted to believe him. After years in the field, witnessing how power protected itself, I'd grown cynical about the possibility of true accountability for those at the top. But Mark's determination reminded me why I'd joined the CIA in the first place, not just to navigate the shadow world, but to shine light into its darkest corners. Maybe there is, I conceded. If we can gather enough evidence, make it impossible to bury. The children came bursting through the door then, cheeks flushed with cold and excitement, demanding hot chocolate and help putting a hat on their lopsided snowman. The conversation paused as we shifted back into parent mode, heating milk and finding marshmallows in our supplies. As darkness fell, I set up my encrypted laptop, connecting through a series of proxies to access my case files on Petrov. Mark sat beside me, his legal mind proving unexpectedly valuable as we pieced together the complex web of financial transactions and corporate structures. Look at this, he said, pointing to a document I'd obtained months earlier but never fully analyzed. This holding company in Cyprus, the board includes a James Whitfield. So? Whitfield was Chandler's mother's maiden name. It's a common alias pattern, using family names that won't appear in basic background checks but have personal significance. I stared at him, impressed. How did you know that? He shrugged. I read spy novels. And I've cross-examined enough witnesses to recognize when someone's creating an alter ego. With renewed focus, we dug deeper into Petrov's business dealings, gradually uncovering a sophisticated network designed to commercialize Volkov's stolen research while obscuring its origins. The technology, officially described as next-generation autonomous navigation systems, was being prepared for sale to both private security firms and government agencies worldwide. The implications are staggering, I murmured as we examined patent applications filed through various shell companies. This isn't just about drones or tracking phones. This technology could create an almost inescapable surveillance infrastructure and make certain people very, very rich in the process, Mark added grimly. Just as we were compiling our findings, the unmarked phone buzzed again. Another encrypted message, this one longer and more urgent, compromised. Location breached. 10 minutes after departure. Moving to secondary site. Matthews reports unusual activity at Petrov's London office. Exercise extreme caution. Will contact when secure. My blood ran cold. They found the cabin. Almost immediately after we left. Mark's expression tightened. How? We were so careful. I shook my head, mind racing through possibilities. I don't know. Maybe the tracking technology is even more advanced than we thought. Or there could be another leak, someone close to Matthews. Or someone close to us, Mark suggested quietly. The implication hung in the air between us. Could there be another betrayal we hadn't anticipated? Someone else in our orbit who wasn't what they seemed? Before I could pursue this troubling thought, a sound outside caught my attention, the distant but unmistakable crunch of tires on snow. I moved swiftly to the window, staying to the side to avoid being silhouetted. A vehicle was approaching, its headlights off, moving slowly up the long Driveway to the lodge. Get the children, I said urgently. Upstairs, in the loft. Now. Mark didn't question, immediately moving to where Emma and Liam were playing a board game by the fire. With calm efficiency that made me proud, he guided them up the ladder to the loft space, whispering instructions to stay quiet and hidden. I quickly shut down the laptop, securing it in its case, and checked my weapon. Whoever was coming, they had found us far too quickly for comfort. The odds of it being a random visitor to an isolated hunting lodge in the middle of winter were vanishingly small. The vehicle stopped about 50 yards from the lodge. Through the gathering darkness, I could make out a black SUV similar to the one that had been watching the house the previous night. Two figures emerged, moving with the deliberate caution of trained operatives. Mark, I called softly. They're here. Two of them, approaching from the front. He rejoined me, his face set with determination. What's the plan? I hesitated. My training and instincts pushed me toward confrontation, neutralize the threat before it could reach us. But with the children present, the calculus changed dramatically. There's a back exit through the kitchen, I said, making a split-second decision. Get the children out that way. There's an old boathouse about a quarter mile down the slope. Hide there until I come for you. He shook his head firmly. I'm not leaving you to face them alone. Mark, no, he interrupted. I may not be trained for this, but I'm not useless. We face this together, protect our children together. The intensity in his eyes told me arguing would be futile. And truthfully, a part of me was relieved not to stand alone. All right, I conceded. But we need to get the children to safety first. Together, we quickly explained the situation to Emma and Liam in terms they could understand without being terrified, a game of hide and seek with high stakes. With practiced parental efficiency, we bundled them into warm clothes, gave them the emergency phone, and helped them slip out the back door toward the boathouse. Remember, I whispered to Emma, kneeling to meet her eyes. Stay absolutely quiet. Don't come out unless you hear the special knock we practiced. She nodded. Solemnly, holding her brother's hand tight. 3 quick, 2 slow. That's right. You're being so brave, both of you. We'll come get you soon. As they disappeared into the darkness, I felt a wrenching in my chest. Every maternal instinct screamed to go with them, to shield them with my body. But the tactical reality was clear, better to confront the threat here, away from where they were hidden. There at the edge of the clearing, Mark reported from the window. Moving slowly, checking for security measures. I joined him, assessing the approach. They're professionals. Military or intelligence background, not common mercenaries. How do you want to play this? I considered our options. Direct confrontation was risky, but so was waiting for them to dictate the terms of engagement. We need to separate them, I decided. Together, they're too dangerous. I'll create a distraction at the front. When they split up to investigate, you take the one who comes around back. Mark nodded, grip tightening on his borrowed gun. What about you? I'll handle the other one, I said with more confidence than I felt. Remember your training? He smiled grimly. You mean the crash course your father-in-law gave me at the cabin this morning? It'll have to do. We moved into position, Mark at the back door, me near the front window. I took a deep breath, centering myself as I'd been taught years ago during my training at the farm. This wasn't my first dangerous confrontation, but it was the first with my family's safety directly at stake. The intruders had reached the front porch now, moving with the silent coordination of a well-practiced team. One positioned himself at the door while the other covered the windows. Standard entry protocol. I waited until they were fully committed to their approach, then deliberately knocked over a lamp near the window. The crash echoed in the quiet night. Immediately, they reacted, the one at the door signaling to his partner to circle around back while he prepared to breach the front entrance. Just as I'd anticipated. As the second man disappeared around the corner of the lodge, I moved swiftly to a position beside the front door, weapon ready. The moment it burst open, I struck, driving the butt of my gun into the intruder's solar plexus, then following with a precise blow to the side of his neck as he doubled over. He dropped to his knees, gasping, but was already reaching for his weapon. I kicked it from his hand and pressed my gun to his temple. Don't move, I ordered. Hands where I can see them. From the back of the lodge came the sounds of a struggle, a grunt, a thud, then silence. My heart raced as I waited to see who would appear. To my immense relief, it was Mark, dragging a semi-conscious man by the collar. A nasty bruise was forming on my husband's cheek, but he was upright and in control. Got him, he said simply, a note of surprise in his voice as if he couldn't quite believe his success. Secure him, I instructed, indicating a set of zip ties in my jacket pocket. Then we find out who sent them. The man at my feet had regained some composure, his breathing steadying as he assessed his situation. There was something familiar about him, a certain professional bearing I recognized from my years in the field. CIA? I asked, studying his face. Or MI6? He said nothing, his expression carefully blank. It doesn't matter, I continued. What matters is what you know about Chandler, Petrov, and the Kharkov technology. A flicker of surprise crossed his face before he could suppress it. Yeah, I said, pressing my advantage. We know about the operation. The sabotage. The deaths that were covered up. We know Chandler stole Volkov's research and is preparing to sell it through Petrov's companies. You don't know anything, he finally spoke, his accent distinctly British. And if you're smart, you'll walk away now. Take your family and disappear. Is that what Chandler sent you to tell us? Mark asked, returning from securing the other intruder. To run and hide? The man's eyes shifted to Mark, then back to me. Chandler didn't send us. Then who did? I demanded. He hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he said, Director Hayes. The name hit me like a physical blow. Hayes was my ultimate superior at the CIA, 3 levels above my handler. If he had sent operatives after us? You're lying, I said, though doubt had already crept in. Why would the CIA director target one of his own agents? Because you're compromised, the man replied flatly. Working with known foreign intelligence assets. Accessing classified files without authorization. From where we stand, you've gone rogue, Agent Harrington. The accusation stung, not least because there was a grain of truth to it. I had broken protocol, accessed files improperly, collaborated with former MI6 agents. All with good reason. But on paper, it looked damning. This is bigger than agency politics, I insisted. Chandler is about to deploy technology that will fundamentally alter the balance of power between governments and citizens. Technology built on research stolen through an operation that killed innocent people. That's not our concern, he replied. Our orders are to bring you in. All of you. Mark stepped closer, his expression hardening. And our children? Were they part of your orders, too? Something shifted in the man's eyes, discomfort, perhaps even shame. The children were to be handed over to Child Protective Services. Standard protocol for offspring of compromised agents. The cold, bureaucratic description of what would have happened to Emma and Liam sent a wave of fury through me. They would have been taken, separated from us, processed through a system designed to handle the collateral damage of espionage operations. That's not going to happen, I said, my voice deadly calm. Here's what is going to happen. You're going to contact Director Hayes and deliver a message. Tell him we have documentation of everything, Kharkov, Chandler's involvement, Petrov's financing, the works. Tell him it's all backed up in multiple secure locations, set to release automatically if anything happens to us or our children. He won't believe you, the man countered, but with less certainty. He doesn't have to believe me, I replied. He just has to consider the possibility I'm telling the truth. The political fallout if this goes public would end careers on both sides of the Atlantic. Is protecting Chandler worth that risk? The man was silent, calculating. I could almost see the mental equations running behind his eyes, risk versus reward, probability of bluff versus the catastrophic consequences if I wasn't bluffing. And one more thing, I added. Tell Hayes we know about Project Blackbird. It was a shot in the dark, a reference to a highly classified program I'd heard whispers about but knew almost nothing concrete. The way the man's pupils dilated told me the gambit had hit home. You have 12 hours, I concluded. After that, everything goes public. As Mark secured our captive alongside his partner, I stepped outside for a moment, needing the cold air to clear my head. The stars were brilliant overhead, the silence of the snow-covered landscape profound. In the distance, I could just make out the dark shape of the boathouse where my children were hiding. Safe for now, but for how long? The confrontation with the CIA operatives had bought us time, but it had also escalated the situation dramatically. If Hayes truly believed I'd gone rogue, the full resources of the agency could be directed against us. And yet, for the first time since my ID had hit the floor in Eleanor's kitchen, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had leverage now. Information powerful enough to make even those at the highest levels pause. Mark joined me on the porch, his breath clouding in the cold air. What now? He asked quietly. Now we get our children, I replied. And then we use everything we've learned to ensure they never have to hide in a boathouse again. He nodded, taking my hand in his. Together, we walked down the snowy path toward our children, each step bringing us closer to a confrontation that would either destroy us or set us free. The boathouse stood silhouetted against the moonlit lake, a dark shape hunched beneath the weight of snow on its roof. As we approached, I performed our special knock against the weathered door, 3 quick, 2 slow, and listened for movement inside. Mommy? Emma's voice came, small but steady. It's us, sweetheart. You can come out now. The door creaked open, and my children emerged from the shadows, Emma first, chin raised with determined bravery, then Liam, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. I gathered them both into my arms, breathing in the scent of their hair, feeling their small hearts beating against mine. Did you win against the bad guys? Liam whispered. I exchanged a glance with Mark over their heads. For now, I replied. Truthfully. But we need to keep moving. Where are we going? Emma asked as Mark lifted Liam onto his shoulders for the trek back to the lodge. To find Grandma and Grandpa, I said. And then to fix this, once and for all. We returned to the lodge where our captives remained secured but conscious, watching us with wary eyes as we gathered our essentials. I'd placed a call to Robert using the encrypted phone, arranging to meet at the secondary location, a safe house in the Catskills that Eleanor had maintained for decades, unknown even to British intelligence. What about them? Mark asked quietly, nodding toward the two agents. We leave them, I decided. But not until we're long gone. The drive to the Catskills took nearly 5 hours, a tense journey through back roads and small towns, changing vehicles once at a pre-arranged location, where Robert had left a car with clean plates and no digital tracking systems. The children dozed in the back seat, the excitement and fear of the day having finally exhausted even their boundless energy. Are you okay? I asked Mark as he drove, his profile illuminated by the occasional passing headlights. He considered the question longer than I expected. I don't know, he finally admitted. Yesterday I was a public defender with a normal family. Today I'm driving a stolen car with my CIA agent wife and our children, running from both American and British intelligence agencies. He laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. It's a lot to process. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. With every fiber of my being. I never wanted this life to touch you or the kids. He reached across the console, taking my hand. I know. And despite everything, I understand why you did what you did. Why you kept it from us. The simple acceptance in his voice nearly undid me. After all the lies, all the compartmentalization, to be understood and not condemned felt like a gift I didn't deserve. When this is over, I promised, no more secrets. No more separate lives. When this is over, he echoed, what does that look like? Do we just go back to normal? Is that even possible? It was the question I'd been avoiding since this began. The truth was, there was no going back. Whatever happened next, our lives had fundamentally changed. The best we could hope for was to forge a new normal, one where we were safe, together, and living honestly. I don't know, I admitted. But whatever comes next, we face it together. All of us. The safe house was nestled in a thick copse of pine trees at the end of a nearly invisible dirt road. No neighboring properties, no passing traffic, just wilderness on all sides. Perfect isolation. Robert met us at the door, rifle cradled casually in one arm as if it were an extension of himself. The transition from scholarly father-in-law to vigilant operative still jarred me, though I was growing accustomed to it. Any trouble? He asked as we ushered the sleepy children inside. We had visitors, I confirmed. CIA, sent by Hayes himself. Robert's expression darkened. So it's escalated to that level. Inside, Eleanor had transformed the sparse safe house into something approaching comfortable. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting warm light over the simple furniture. She'd prepared a late meal, and the smell of stew and fresh bread filled the small space. You're all safe, she said, the relief evident in her voice as she embraced each of us in turn. When she came to me, her hug was fiercer than I expected, almost maternal. Well done, she murmured. As the children ate, then settled onto makeshift beds near the fire, the adults gathered at the kitchen table to share information and formulate a plan. Matthews has gone dark, Robert reported grimly. His last message indicated he was being watched. We have to assume he's been compromised. Hayes sent operatives after us directly, I added. They claimed I've gone rogue, collaborating with foreign agents. That would be us, Eleanor said dryly. The good news, Mark interjected, is that we have leverage. Proof of Chandler's involvement in the Kharkov operation, his theft of Volkov's research, and his current plans to commercialize the technology through Petrov. Leverage only works if we can use it, Eleanor pointed out. If we're being hunted by both CIA and MI6, how do we get the information to people who can act on it? It was the critical question, and one I'd been pondering since our confrontation with the agents. Traditional whistleblowing channels were likely compromised. The press was too slow and unreliable when facing the full might of intelligence agencies determined to suppress information. We need someone with enough power to protect us, I said slowly, but independent enough not to be controlled by either Chandler or Hayes. That's a short list, Robert observed. What about Judge Evelyn Chen? Mark suggested. She presides over the FISA court. She has the security clearance to view classified information and the judicial authority to issue binding orders to intelligence agencies. I considered this. Judge Chen had a reputation for fierce independence and unimpeachable integrity. She'd ruled against intelligence agencies multiple times when she believed they'd overstepped their bounds. It could work, I said cautiously. But we'd need to reach her directly, without alerting her staff or security detail, who might have connections to Hayes. I might know a way, Mark said. She teaches a seminar at Columbia Law School every Thursday morning. Minimal security, just her and the students. Tomorrow is Thursday, Eleanor noted, checking her watch. That gives us less than 12 hours to prepare. Then we'd better get started, Robert said, unfolding a map of New York City on the table. As we formulated our approach, I found myself watching Mark with newfound admiration. His legal mind proved invaluable, identifying the precise statutes and precedents that would compel Judge Chen to act on our information. Without prompting, he drafted a concise brief outlining the legal case against Chandler and his accomplices, complete with citations to relevant national security laws. What? He asked, catching my gaze. Nothing, I smiled. Just thinking that you might have missed your calling. You'd make a hell of an intelligence analyst. He chuckled. I'll stick to defending the innocent, thanks. Though I suppose that's what we're doing now, in a way. Defending innocent people who would be harmed by this technology. As dawn approached, we had our plan. Robert and Eleanor would create a diversion to draw away Judge Chen's campus security. Mark and I would approach her directly after her seminar, present our evidence, and request emergency judicial intervention. The children would remain at the safe house with a trusted friend of Eleanor's, a former MI6 communications specialist named Margaret, who arrived just before sunrise, armed with both a grandmotherly demeanor and, I suspected, a considerable arsenal hidden in her sensible cardigan. I don't want to leave them, I confessed to Mark as we prepared to depart. What if something goes wrong? They'll be safer here, he reasoned, though I could see the same concern reflected in his eyes. And Margaret seems formidable? I suggested. I was going to say terrifying, he admitted. But in a reassuring way. Saying goodbye to Emma and Liam was harder than any operational departure I'd ever experienced. I knelt before them, struggling to find words that would reassure without frightening. We'll be back tonight, I promised. And when we come back, the adventure will be over. No more running, no more hiding. Are you going to fight the bad guys? Liam asked, his small face serious. In a way, I said. But with truth, not weapons. Sometimes the truth is the most powerful weapon of all. Emma, wise beyond her years, studied my face. Be careful, Mommy. You too, Daddy. Always, sweetheart, Mark assured her, his voice steady despite the emotion I knew he felt. The drive to New York City passed in tense silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I checked and rechecked my weapon, though I prayed I wouldn't need to use it. Mark reviewed his notes, memorizing key points to present to Judge Chen. In the second vehicle ahead of us, Robert and Eleanor would be doing the same, preparing for their roles with the disciplined focus of experienced operatives. We reached Columbia University just as Judge Chen's seminar was scheduled to end. Robert and Eleanor moved into position near the security office, ready to trigger a false alarm that would draw resources away from the law building. Mark and I waited in a quiet corridor, watching as students began to file out of the classroom. Judge Evelyn Chen emerged last, a diminutive woman with steel-gray hair and alert eyes that missed nothing. Before she could reach the building's exit, Mark stepped forward. Judge Chen, he said respectfully. My name is Mark Harrington. I'm an attorney with the Public Defender's Office. I need 5 minutes of your time on a matter of urgent national security. She regarded him with immediate suspicion. Mr. Harrington, I don't know how you're aware of my FISA court appointment, but any such matters should be brought through proper channels. The channels are compromised, I said, joining them. We have evidence of illegal activities involving both CIA and MI6 leadership. Activities that threaten fundamental privacy rights and democratic oversight. Her expression didn't change, but she studied us more carefully. You have 2 minutes to convince me this isn't some elaborate hoax. Mark handed her a flash drive. This contains documentation of Operation Kharkov, a failed extraction in Ukraine in 2006 that resulted in multiple deaths. It proves that Sir Richard Chandler, then deputy director of MI6, deliberately sabotaged the operation to steal advanced surveillance technology developed by a defecting scientist named Volkov. That technology, I continued, is now being prepared for commercial deployment through companies controlled by Russian oligarch Alexei Petrov. It would create unprecedented surveillance capabilities that bypass all existing legal protections. Judge Chen's eyes narrowed. And you have Proof of this? Financial records, internal communications, patent applications filed through shell companies, Mark confirmed. But most importantly, testimony from former MI6 operatives who were part of the original operation and witnessed Chandler's actions. These operatives, she said carefully. Where are they now? Nearby, I replied, equally careful. Ready to provide sworn testimony under your judicial supervision. She considered this for a long moment, her legal mind visibly weighing options, risks, jurisdictional questions. And why come to me specifically, she finally asked. Because you have both the security clearance to review this material and the judicial authority to issue orders restraining the involved agencies, Mark explained. And because your reputation for integrity is unimpeachable. A hint of a smile touched her lips at the skillful flattery, though her eyes remained shrewd. You realize what you're asking could be considered an end run around established oversight mechanisms. Those mechanisms have been compromised, I insisted. Director Hayes himself authorized operations against American citizens, against my family, to protect Chandler and this technology. Something in my tone must have convinced her, for she gave a short, decisive nod. My chambers, 1 hour. She said briskly. Bring your witnesses. I'll review the materials in the meantime. She pocketed the flash drive. And Mr. Harrington, Ms. Harrington, I supplied. Ms. Harrington. If this is anything less than what you've represented, I will personally see that you face the full consequences of wasting the court's time and making false allegations against intelligence officials. Understood, Your Honor, Mark replied with appropriate gravity. As she walked away, I felt the first real surge of hope since this ordeal began. We had our foot in the door. Now we just needed to leverage it. Wide open. She's going to help, Mark said with quiet confidence as we left the building. I could see it in her eyes. Let's hope so, I replied, scanning our surroundings for any sign we'd been followed or observed. We still need to get your parents safely to her chambers. We rendezvoused with Robert and Eleanor at a prearranged location 3 blocks from campus. Their diversion had worked perfectly, a sophisticated electronic intrusion into the campus security system that had every available officer responding to a non-existent threat at the opposite end of the university. Judge Chen agreed to hear us out, I reported. Her chambers, 1 hour. Eleanor nodded approvingly. Well done. Did she review the evidence? She's doing so now, Mark confirmed. She seemed skeptical but willing to listen. That's all we need, Robert said. Once she sees the full picture, her legal training won't allow her to ignore it. We made our way to the courthouse where Judge Chen's chambers were located, taking a circuitous route and splitting up to avoid drawing attention. Security was surprisingly light, a single checkpoint where our IDs were scanned before we were directed to the judge's private offices on the 5th floor. Judge Chen was waiting for us, her small frame dwarfed by the massive oak desk that dominated her chambers. The flash drive sat before her, and from her expression, I could tell she'd reviewed at least some of its contents. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, she acknowledged, then turned her penetrating gaze to Robert and Eleanor. And you would be the former MI6 operatives, I presume. Robert and Eleanor Harrington, Robert confirmed. We were part of the extraction team in Kharkov, 2006. Judge Chen gestured for us to be seated. I've reviewed the materials you provided. If authentic, they represent a serious breach of both law and ethical conduct by intelligence officials. Before we proceed further, I need to understand exactly what you're seeking from this court. Mark leaned forward. First, protective orders preventing any further action against our family by either American or British intelligence agencies. Second, judicial oversight of the technology in question to prevent its deployment without proper legal safeguards. Third, referral of the evidence regarding the Kharkov operation to appropriate authorities for potential criminal prosecution. Judge Chen raised an eyebrow. Ambitious. Necessary, Eleanor countered. This technology in its current form would render existing privacy laws effectively meaningless. It can track individuals through methods that bypass all current warrant requirements. The judge considered this, then turned to me. And your role in all this, Ms. Harrington? As I understand it, you are an active CIA operative. I was investigating financial transactions between Alexei Petrov and several Defense Department officials, I explained. That investigation led me to discover connections to the Kharkov operation and Chandler's involvement. When I began asking questions, Director Hayes classified me as rogue and sent operatives to apprehend me and my family. Including your children. Judge Chen noted, a hint of distaste evident in her tone. Yes, Your Honor. She was silent for a long moment, her fingers steepled before her. Then, with decisive movements, she reached for her phone. This is Judge Chen. I need an emergency SCIF prepared immediately. And contact Judge Ramirez and Judge Patel. Tell them their presence is required for a special 3-judge panel under Section 702 jurisdiction. She paused, listening to the response. Yes, now. National security matter, highest priority. As she hung up, she fixed us with a stern gaze. What you've brought me requires extraordinary measures. A single judge, even one with visa court authority, isn't sufficient for something of this magnitude. We'll convene a special panel with expanded jurisdiction. When? Robert asked. Immediately, she replied, checking her watch. The SCIF should be ready within 30 minutes. In the meantime, I'm issuing temporary restraining orders preventing any action against any of you by U.S. intelligence agencies. She began typing rapidly on her computer. It won't stop them completely if they're determined, but it creates a paper trail and legal liability if they proceed. And Chandler? Eleanor pressed. He's beyond your jurisdiction. Judge Chen's smile was thin but determined. Sir Richard may be beyond my direct judicial reach, but not beyond the reach of international law. Once we've secured your situation, I'll be making calls to counterparts in the UK judiciary who will be very interested in these materials. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt the vice grip of fear around my heart begin to loosen. We had found not just an ally, but a powerful one with the legal authority and moral conviction to act. The next several hours passed in a blur of testimony, documentation, and legal proceedings. The SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility designed to prevent electronic surveillance, became our world as we presented our case to the 3-judge panel convened by Judge Chen. Robert and Eleanor provided detailed accounts of the Kharkov operation, their voices steady as they relived the mission that had gone so catastrophically wrong. Mark outlined the legal framework for understanding both the original crimes and the current threat posed by the technology's deployment. I presented the financial evidence connecting Petrov to Chandler and the defense contractors preparing to market the surveillance systems. Throughout it all, the judges listened with grave attention, occasionally interjecting with precise questions that revealed their grasp of both the legal and national security implications. We're prepared to issue comprehensive orders, Judge Chen announced finally, after conferring with her colleagues. Restraining all intelligence activities against your family, requiring preservation of all evidence related to Kharkov and the subsequent development of Volkov's technology, and appointing a special master to review all deployment plans for compliance with constitutional protections. And Hayes? I asked. Chandler? We've referred the evidence to the appropriate authorities, Judge Ramirez, a former prosecutor with a reputation for tenacity, explained. The Attorney General has been notified, as has the Inspector General for the intelligence community. As for Sir Richard, diplomatic channels have been opened to share information with British authorities. Will it be enough? Eleanor asked. The question we were all thinking. These are powerful men with significant resources and influence. The sunlight of legal scrutiny is remarkably effective, Judge Patel observed. Particularly when the evidence is as compelling as what you've presented. Even the most powerful individuals find it difficult to operate when their actions are being monitored by multiple oversight bodies. As we prepared to leave the SCIF, Judge Chen pulled me aside. Your children, she said quietly. Where are they now? Somewhere safe, I replied, still cautious despite everything. She nodded. I've added specific language to the protective orders regarding them. Any approach within 100 yards by any intelligence personnel will constitute contempt of court, punishable by immediate incarceration. Her eyes, behind elegant reading glasses, were fierce. Some lines should never be crossed, regardless of national security claims. Thank you, I said, unexpectedly moved by this stranger's concern for my children. Don't thank me, she replied briskly. This is simply the law functioning as it should. Too often, we allow exceptions and special circumstances to erode the very principles we're supposedly protecting. She closed her portfolio with a decisive snap. Not today. Outside the courthouse, as evening fell over the city, the 4 of us stood together on the steps, a strange family united by both blood and extraordinary circumstance. Is it really over? Mark asked, the cautious hope in his voice reflecting what we all felt. Not entirely, Robert said realistically. There will be pushback, attempts to discredit or minimize. Men like Chandler and Hayes don't surrender power easily. But the immediate danger has passed, Eleanor added. And more importantly, the truth is now on record, protected by judicial oversight that even they can't easily circumvent. I took a deep breath of the cold city air, feeling the weight of the past days beginning to lift. Then let's go get our children and start figuring out what normal looks like from here. The drive back to the safe house was lighter somehow. The tension that had sustained us beginning to dissolve into exhausted relief. We called ahead on the secure line, letting Margaret know we were coming home successful. Emma and Liam were waiting at the window when we pulled up, their faces pressed against the glass, lighting up with joy as they saw all four of us emerge from the vehicles. They burst through the door, running down the snowy path to meet us. I knelt to catch them, holding them close as they babbled excited questions about our mission and whether the bad guys were gone for good. They are, I assured them, meeting Mark's eyes over their heads. We told the truth, and the truth was strong enough to protect us. See? I told you, Emma said to her brother with the supreme confidence of an older sibling. Mom and Dad are the good guys. They always win. Margaret appeared in the doorway, nodding her approval as she observed our reunion. Well done, she called. I've prepared a celebration dinner. Nothing fancy, but better than running on empty. Inside, the safe house felt different, warmer. More like a temporary home than a hiding place. As we shared the meal Margaret had prepared, the conversation gradually shifted from the immediate crisis to the future. What happens now? Mark asked, the question directed at all of us but particularly at his parents. Do you go back to being retired professors? Do we pretend none of this happened? Eleanor exchanged a glance with Robert before answering. I don't think we can go back, not entirely. But perhaps we can go forward more honestly. As a family. A very unusual family, Robert added with a dry chuckle. The best kind, Liam declared through a mouthful of mashed potatoes, causing a ripple of laughter around the table. Later, as the children slept and the adults gathered around the fire with glasses of Robert's prized scotch, apparently a staple in all his safe houses, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past few days. I never thanked you, I said to Eleanor, surprising myself with the words. For all those years of cold judgment and scrutiny. She raised an eyebrow. That requires explanation. You knew something was off about me from the beginning, I continued. You pushed, you tested, you watched for any sign I might be a threat to your son or grandchildren. Including that boiling water test. I raised my arm, where the burn was now healing but still visible. As painful as it was, I can't fault your instincts or your protectiveness. I could have found less dramatic ways to test you, she admitted, a hint of remorse in her voice. But old habits die hard, I finished with a small smile. Like mother, like daughter-in-law, apparently. Mark, who had been listening to this exchange with quiet attention, reached for my hand. You know what's strangest about all this? How much sense it makes in hindsight.